Welcome to another episode of Pellowe Talk. Today I'm joined by New South Wales Upper House member of the Legislative Council, Paul Green. Thank you for joining me, Paul. How are you today?
Very good, mate. It's beautiful one day, perfect the next where you are, but I must admit it's pretty nice down here at 30 degrees.
Well, that does sound nice and balmy. It's actually nice warm weather lately. Now, I want to talk to you today about this fascinating piece of legislation that you're introducing into the New South Wales Parliament, an anti-slavery bill. I thought slavery was illegal in Australia. Why do we need another bill against slavery?
Well, modern day slavery, surprisingly, a lot of people don't realise, but there's 45.8 million people involved in slavery or slavery-like practices right across the earth. 70% of those are in Asia Pacific region. And of course, out of that, there's quite a lot in Australia. So much so that I think there's been about 4,000 cases in recent years investigated by the federal police in Australia. So
that's only cases investigated. That's not even an estimate of current slaves.
That's right. I mean, there's not too many criminals that come up and say, hey, look, I'm doing this too. So sadly, there's a lot of hidden in plain sight.
So if 4,000 is the cases investigated, is there an estimate, even a guesstimate on how many slaves there are at the moment in Australia?
Well, no, I don't think there's a guesstimate. And I think that's one reason I ran my human trafficking inquiry for New South Wales. So what I want to do was just have a stock take to say, hey, what's this happening in New South Wales? Where's it up to? Who's in control of it? What parameters have been put in terms of legal application? And what can we do about it?
Yeah. Look, I think the average Australian, and I do believe in Australian privilege. If you're born in Australia, check your privilege. The average Australian would be shocked to find out that slavery is a modern phenomenon in the urban centres of Australia. We're civilised. We have a justice system. We're better than that. So in modern Australia, what does slavery actually look like? There's no slave markets around the corner.
No, what it is those people that have been able to take an opportunity, sadly, on the backs of the most vulnerable, who have been able to try and make an extra buck by controlling the circumstances by which those people exist, or in terms of how they're providing services.
The language you're using could easily be put in Sally McManus's mouth. I mean, like, why don't these people just unionise? Exploitative employers is what we hear all the times that the unions are fighting against. Is that what your concern is?
Look, I think the thing is that there's so much exploitation out there. A lot of it is hidden in plain sight, as the federal government's report quoted the same title. People don't realise that it's next door, it's in your community, it's down your shops, it's in our towns, it's in our cities. And what we've tried to do with this inquiry and this bill before New South Wales Parliament is to make people aware, hey, it really is, it could be the person next door to you. Do something about it. Don't just accept it for what it is, because these people have been exploited by some very, terrible situations by people who are trying to make a dollar on the back of those people.
Now, what was the report on Four Corners? That happened long after your investigation and committee and things were going on. But Four Corners had a story which investigated slavery, and it actually found that there were people being employed by embassies in Canberra. So it was really, really close to where we would expect democracy and freedom and liberty, equality and justice to be prevalent. But what was happening in those cases?
Well, it was a good report because what it did, it showed even at our national level, just down from Parliament House in Canberra, a couple of embassies were taking extreme advantage of a couple of workers that were brought over from overseas. One particular situation was the Philippines. Those people came from an agency where they were promised to make, $1,000, $2,000 a month. to be employed as a nanny or that sort of type of domestic worker, and only to be, you know, get to Australia and have those forms fraudulently filled out to say that they were getting that money and they were performing in that role, to find out that actually the money wasn't given to them. It wasn't, you know, not all of it was sent back to the families, but they were left high and dry, and they had to work, you know, huge hours, like 18 hours a day with very little,
wow.
you know, food and situation there to help them, you know, have their upkeep. And so, you know, this was just probably 1 mile from our national capital.
Wow.
That's just one example. And then in my speech to the Parliament, I drew up another example where just out the western suburbs, there was a human trafficking perpetrator, you know, basically prostituting 4 girls at the age of 12 years of age. You know, 12 years of age, 4 of them here in Sydney in the western suburbs. I mean, who's buying that service for a start? It's just deplorable. And so these types of things are happening. They are happening in New South Wales. They're happening across Australia. And we've just decided to say enough is enough and address it and be responsible for our backyard. And our backyard is New South Wales. And of course, we're hoping that the federal government will look after the rest in months to come with their own modern day Slavery Act.
So with the examples of the people in the embassies being exploited, what could we have done? What law changes or even neighbourly changes would have prevented that from happening?
Well, it's complicated because my understanding is in their own embassy, they're under their own jurisdiction. So they're not in an Australian jurisdiction. So it makes it very hard for lawmakers to deal something. But the minute that those people got out of those embassies and were able to be brought into the, say, the Australian jurisdiction, of course, we could then at least minister to those people and try and help them with their response and outwork their situation where they've been trafficked literally here in Australia. So, we can't do much when it comes to the embassies, but you would expect that at the very highest level of society and the community role, the political roles, that they would lead with exemplary example. But it was far from that, unfortunately.
So with the penalties that are being considered, what are you suggesting? Are the penalties that are currently in place for slavery inadequate?
Well, that's a good question. What we're saying is basically we're trying to set up a situation where we slave-proof our supply lines. And some of the penalties there is basically saying, hey, the big companies earning over $50 million a year, we want to start with you guys because you really should show the leadership in that level. Now, we're also asking, that the Archbishop of Sydney came to the inquiry and said, I'm going to do something about this, put forward an anti-slavery task force in his jurisdiction as well, and put forward a report basically saying they're going to slave-proof their supply lines. So all this bill does, it basically helps encourage businesses to do the same, and of course the government. I mean, the government should lead by example and slave-proof its supply lines, and that those ethical supply lines we should be able to go out to the general public and say the government is leading by example on this, and we have done everything we can possibly and reasonably do to ensure that our goods and services have not been provided on the backs of slavery.
How do you actually do that? If you're not already doing it, why isn't it already being done? And if it's not already being done, assuming there's good reasons, and it's not just an apathy about not caring, how do you actually make sure that your supply lines are free of slavery?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that was brought forward in the human trafficking inquiry. Was what do you do in terms of how can you verify, and how far can you go back to verify your supply lines? And look, that's a reasonable thing. We know in some situations that's going to be very, very tough to do, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should be encouraging businesses and all those procuring goods and services from across the globe or even in Australia to make sure that they're doing their very best to ensure that their product or goods and services have not been tainted by slavery. And we need to hold those people accountable that are using slavery, slavery-like practices to get ahead financially and then provide goods and services to us. We need to make sure that we're catching them out and say that's not good enough, and it's not very humanistic. It's not the way that, you know, we want a good society, want to encourage good practice, and this is one of those things that we believe reflect your business and reflect your character. If you're all about money, you won't care working on the back of slavery, but if you are genuinely interested in people and communities, you will do something about it.
Sure. Do you think there should be penalties for people who may not be directly exploiting slaves, but may be benefiting from the cheaper supply prices, like might be one step in the supply chain removed from slavery and know it?
I think what we're trying to do is, I'm a big believer in the carrot, not the stick, when it comes to businesses, small business or even big business. I believe we really should be encouraging people to make the right choices and come forward with the right actions first. If they don't, if they're more interested in their bottom line and propping up their wallet than looking after and doing the right thing by people, you know, I have no hesitation that we should go after them with the stick. But look, initially, always the carrot. We should be encouraging these businesses to lead by example, do the very best to make sure that their product, goods and services are not being tainted by slavery. If they are, identify it, recognise it and deal with it, and do something positive to make sure you can pull those people out of slavery.
What kind of increases in penalties is your legislation recommending? Does it go as far as making specific recommendations for increasing the penalties, or is it just a generally, let's look at increasing the penalties?
Look, the bill's a plug and play bill. It's a very smart bill in this, is that we didn't try to reinvent every law in New South Wales, or even where it connects with federal law. What we've done was made a bill with lots of levers in it that the Commissioner can pull those levers if need be, because those laws exist in other legislation throughout New South Wales. The outcome of terms of penalties, the Commissioner can install penalties when big companies have tried to be disingenuous, have not told the full truth, and tried to get around the standards of reporting where they're up to in terms of their supply lines. If they think they can jump the fence, jump the hurdle, hide their evidence because they know that they've been tainted with supply lines in slavery, the Commissioner has been empowered up to 10,000 units or $1.1 million in penalties. And so even further down, they could even go to prison if they're found to completely chose to be ignorant of those facts that are well known.
Now, you've just referred a few times to the Commissioner, and that's actually an important part of the legislation that we haven't discussed yet. One of the first provisions of this bill is to actually create an Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, look, it's a big thing. It's obviously modelled off the UK modern day slavery bill, and of course the UK Commissioner over there, Kevin Hyland, has done a wonderful job in really setting the pace for the Western nations of what they can expect by having a Commissioner. The important thing here is people saying, well, why do we need one in New South Wales and we need one for Australia? My answer to that would be that New South Wales is a big jurisdiction. I think every state should have an anti-slavery commissioner, and then the national commissioner could get on and continue not only to just have his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the states by having that annual reporting time with these fellow commissioners, but the Australian commissioner will be very involved, I think, in the Asia Pacific, where we know that over 30 million people have been enslaved through Asia Pacific. So I would think Australia would take a leadership role there. So I'm not a big believer that the federal commissioner will have able to do all our own states and territories in Australia and be a leader in terms of the Asia Pacific region. So having a state one will make sure they got their finger on the pulse of New South Wales. They would put forward a strategic plan about how they will be getting businesses, government and all those players to engage into having a slave-free state. And of course, they would also be heavily involved in education and other acts of promotion to ensure that our community is well up to scratch with about what part this state is playing in terms of modern day slavery or slavery-like practices.
Now, something that we've spoken a lot about is the responsibility of governments and large businesses in particular to ensure and be diligent in preventing slavery in their supply chain. And we've talked about increasing penalties for people who do enslave and unfairly oppress and enslave people. But what about the actual victims themselves? Is there provisions in your bill to provide support for the victims, counselling, retraining, deprogramming, medical care where they've been injured and been kept in really adverse circumstances? What kind of victim-centred support is there envisaged by the bill, if any?
Yeah, look, it's a very important part of the bill, actually. First is the Antislavery Commissioner, and I think secondly, we need to have a victim-centred approach. As I travelled the United States with the FBI, the LAPD, the Homeland Security, a whole bunch of these agencies, what they were doing really well now, as opposed to probably 10 years ago, is being victim-centred and ensuring that when they get a victim in, that they're able to, help them secure their world as they know it, and then be able to apply services. But you need to be real. When a victim comes forward and they've been totally ripped off by a trafficker or a perpetrator, they have low self-esteem, their world's shattered, and I'm happy to say the sort of models that we're seeing now is just to stop and make sure that they feel safe, they're secure, we look after what they need in terms of food and clothing, and a safe place to stay, and then we start to unwrap the layers of probably what's been years of abuse. And so the victim-centred part in the bill goes on to say that proceeds of crime would be returned to the victim's compensation scheme in a particular section where that human trafficked persons or those involved in slavery-like practices will be able to get access to some of that money to help them either get counselling, get medical help, or establish their life so they can be fully restored. That will take many years. I mean, it's like PTSD. Trauma of these people's lives just keeps unfolding year after year in different ways as they adjust their life outside being trafficked.
What actually catalysed all this for you? What actually, was this something you'd thought of before you were elected to the upper house in New South Wales, or was there a particular moment where it crystallised for you as something you needed to act on?
Well, look, I think first of all, I think being a Christian, Jesus said, make sure you look after the most vulnerable, the widows and the children. And, out of that stat of 45.8 million people being enslaved across the globe, 9.1 million of those are children. 9.1 million. That is a sort of equivalent of 838 A3 airline Airbuses.
Wow.
That's an amazing equivalent of how many children that slavery or sex exploitation is happening with these kids, over 9 million. So I guess what tweaked my heart was I was watching a movie, just like any dad on the weekend. Liam Neeson came on in a movie called Taken One. And yes. I sat there as a dad with two daughters, and I didn't know what I was in for with this movie. I didn't know what it was about. And suddenly it was about his daughter being taken after going on holiday and taken in and enslaved and put into sex exploitation, drugged to the eyeballs, and then sold off to some people, very wealthy people across the planet. That shook me to the core. I just could not believe that exists in a Western world. And after having that conversation about that particular movie with different people, it wasn't long before I found that actually it's a reality. This is happening. It's happening sadly, daily across the planet. And I just felt like there was something I could do maybe in New South Wales as a dad and as a parent to make sure that whatever we could do to ensure that our kids, when they go away, we can have confidence that they're going to come back as as happy as they went and as safe as they went. So
yeah.
I started to set aside to sort of see what I could do. And of course, that ended up being running an inquiry into human trafficking and also traveling to the US to find out what other lead agencies and other non-government agencies like International Justice Mission, A21, Children of the Night with Dr. Lois Lee is doing in the area of trafficking and trafficking persons.
Mm-hmm. Well done. I congratulate you on the initiative. Yeah, we did hope that William Wilberforce got rid of it all, but we should never rest and never take it for granted. I can't imagine that you would get any opposition to this bill. I hope to hear from you now that there isn't any.
Look, I think initial soundings is that the Labor Party has come on board, the Liberal Party's on board, but they've yet to take it to their cabinet. But the Labor Party have given me unconditional support to where the bill is now. We are entertaining some further amendments to fine-tune it a little better. Now with the feedback of stakeholders.
Yep.
Shortly I'll be travelling around the state to do some more research with
Is it fine-tuning or are they trying to water it down?
Well, it's a good point. It's not them trying to do that. It's about me trying to make sure that we get a bill that gets through both houses of Parliament. And at the end of the day, good can sometimes be better than perfect because perfect won't get through both houses. But a good bill will. And that's a good place to start. We've got to make room for people to be able to grow into this and grow into a place where they can contribute to ending modern slavery, not just in New South Wales, not just in Australia, but globally. Are
you trying to be diplomatic to keep all stakeholders invested?
The art of politics is negotiation, and the Christian Democratic Party have had a good run here in New South Wales. We've been House of Review, and we've been the balance of power, so we've been able to negotiate with all parties through my 7.5 years. We've had about 100 and probably 150 plus amendments moved in the upper house, and we've had about 143 agreed to date. Probably over 90% of the amendments have got through, well over 90%. And that's just the art of negotiation. You have to be able to work with all parties and bring them to a place to say, well, look, we understand everyone's got commitments and people to please and stakeholders to move with. But at the end of the day, you're probably right. This is not one to sort of be, shrinking back on. I think we need to show leadership as New South Wales normally does and lead by example.
Yep, brilliant. Well, again, I applaud you and I encourage anybody in New South Wales to write to their local member and to their upper house representatives and express some strong support for this anti-slavery, encouraging them to be robust and aggressive in this legislation. It has to be stamped out and we have to do everything within our power to protect those most vulnerable amongst us in our society. Profit is no justification for injustice.
Absolutely, well said.
Yeah.
Look, if I can, people can sign a petition because if I do have any resistance, I do want to follow it up with thousands, hopefully tens of thousands of signatures. Yep. So people can go on paulgreen.com.au, look for the Eradicate Modern Day Slavery, click on that and you can find a petition there to either sign online or print one out and take it to your local church or local community and have it signed and send it into the address at the bottom of the petition. Yep. It would be much appreciated. I mean, this is not my bill. This is our bill, New South Wales bill, our contribution to eradicating modern day slavery in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Go look up that petition, but not only will it be something you can Google and find, the links for it will be beneath this video in the description. So you can click right on there and go straight to it, nice and easy. And add your name to the signature and then share it on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. Let's get this overwhelmingly said. It should be unanimous. It should be bipartisan. That we all say slavery has no place in our society. Hopefully this is a no-brainer. Hopefully this is a no-brainer. And the support, if it was your daughter, if it was, how would you feel? If it was your 12-year-old daughter being sold and trafficked into slavery in a foreign nation, in a foreign embassy, where the local law can't protect her. Wouldn't you want everybody's first concern in that nation to be her and nothing else? So, yeah.
David, it's not just that, if I can say. I mean, now that we've stopped pedophiles from going overseas and doing, this sex tourism that they do, now we're seeing a huge increase in cyber sex trafficking, which my bill addresses a little bit. As little as $40, people can go online and watch a child across overseas in Indonesia or Philippines be totally exploited sexually, all sorts of violence. For $40, the depravity of some human beings to want to pay money to watch a child be endangered is beyond me. But there's some sickos out there doing it, and we're trying to tighten the legal ropes here in New South Wales to deal with this, because it is someone's son, it is someone's daughter.
Yeah, awesome. Well, all the best, and thank you for your time today, Paul Green.
Well, thanks, Pellowe Talk, and look forward to maybe catching up in the future after a successful bill.
Indeed, that'll be great. Look forward to it then.